Hey everyone, welcome to today's live.
This Taylor Farms salad kit is freaking delicious. So freaking delicious. Seriously.
All right, just making sure that all of the audio is good on here and everybody can see me and hear me. Looks good on my end. If you guys are just jumping in, go ahead and give me a thumbs up in the chat. Let me know that you can hear me, see me okay, and where you're from. We're going to be talking about gardening today, so it should be a fun conversation. Hopefully I can answer some gardening questions for you guys. Hoping to talk about some common pest issues, some weed control, composting, pruning, and kind of just wherever the conversation goes as far as the garden goes. Awesome. Thank you. All right, I'm going to wait a few more minutes and let some people jump in here. So welcome. If you're just jumping in, go ahead and leave a comment in the comment section. Let me know that you can see me and hear me okay. I feel like my screen is really blurry tonight. Maybe it's just my lighting. So how is everyone tonight? How is everybody's gardens doing? I know we're kind of in the thick of it here in August. I don't know about other grow zones, but here in 6A, we're just getting like the fruits of our labor. So I'm just starting to get some green tomatoes, and my squashes have been doing really well. And I'm also getting ready to do my fall gardens. So that should be a fun planning adventure. I've never really done a fall garden before, so we shall see how that goes. I usually end up timing it wrong, and I just don't have enough time to get a fall garden in. Hey, Bill, welcome. Glad you guys could make it. I'm hoping we get a couple people in here tonight and have a good conversation about gardening tonight. Mine's full of weeds too. I'll be doing a summer garden tour here soon, so you guys will see how big of a mess my garden is right now. Alrighty. So what are some gardening things that you guys want to talk about tonight? I have a kind of bullet point list of things I want to go over, but I figured I'd ask you guys too, kind of what you would like to talk about tonight as far as the garden goes. The outside workbench is really nice. I haven't used it to really work on, but I've been putting like seedlings out on the bench, and that's been working out really well. And it's a really nice place to just sit and look at the garden and enjoy the garden that way. So it's been a nice addition. If you guys are just jumping in, be sure to say hi. Let me know that you're here. Leave a comment in the chat section for me. Make sure you guys give my video a thumbs up. That helps it get out there so other people can see that I am live, which is super helpful. If you know anybody who would enjoy having a talk about gardening or has any questions, go ahead and share this live video to your social media platforms. That would be super helpful as well, because we want to talk about as much gardening stuff as we can, with us being kind of in the thick of it. Some things I want to talk about tonight is maybe just getting started with gardening. I know it can be really intimidating, starting with gardening, maybe what to grow, as well as some common pests that we're dealing with here in the thick of summer. Weed control is another good one that we're going to be talking about. Some composting, pruning, and trellising as well. Those are some really good ones that I kind of want to touch base on here tonight, being that everything is in grow season. Alrighty. Well, I think I'm just going to go ahead and get started here. Feel free to leave your comments, questions, any of that in the chat box. I am going to be monitoring that. Hopefully I can get your questions answered or point you in the right direction tonight. So the first thing I kind of want to touch base on is getting started with gardening. I know it's a little bit late in the season to be starting with gardening, but oh wow, that sounds bright. Hello. There we go. It is a little bit late to be getting started with a summer garden, but it is not too late for a fall garden. So if you're wanting to get started now, it is not too late. So a lot of it just depends on where you're at, getting started with gardening. Whether you have, a patio, a sunny window, a patch of yard, a corner, or a big open field, it really just boils down to the space that you have, and what kind of gardening method is going to work best for you. I do personally raised garden beds. If you haven't seen them before, I did a whole playlist full of how I built my raised garden beds. You can find that over on my YouTube channel in the playlist section. I did the raised garden beds because my yard holds a ton of water. And so having the beds raised a little bit allows for all of that water to go somewhere versus sitting in my garden rotting out my plants. So that is why I went with raised garden beds, as well as it being a little bit easier to manage for me. I did a tilled garden a few years before I did the raised garden beds, and the weeds took over horribly because I did not use any weed control methods, and it was really just hard to keep up with. So a lot of getting started with gardening and figuring out what works for you is just a lot of trial and error. So think about what your situation is personally and kind of go from there. I know some people who just completely do container gardening on their back porch, which is fantastic. Doing something is better than doing nothing. So I encourage you to find your space that has, a good amount of sunlight, and then just try something. You're not really going to know what's going to work for you unless you get out there and do it. So I highly recommend just diving in and trying something. And you'll learn from trial and error and have a little bit of experience under your belt to know what might work better the next season. Gardening is a lot of trial and error and just continuing to try things and experiment. And there's really no right or wrong way to do it, guys, because everybody's situation is a little bit different. So for getting started, I just encourage you to start. Grab a pot, throw some dirt on the ground, till it, rake it, just flip over the grass. I mean, there's so many ways to do gardening, guys, so many ways. I know a lot of people ask me what to grow, what's easy to grow. I have personally found that there's really not, as far as vegetables and fruits go, there's really no levels of vegetables and fruits, as far as beginner, intermediate, advanced. It all kind of grows the same in my opinion. I just kind of throw things in the ground, pray to God that it grows, and kind of let God take care of things. That's kind of my method of gardening. um, but I always recommend that you grow things that you actually like to eat. When I first got started gardening, I did a lot of things that we weren't really a huge fan of eating, and a lot of it went to the compost or to the chickens. And so I really try to zero in each year on growing only what my family enjoys eating. So I always recommend that as far as what to start with when you want to grow food. So do you like to grow carrot, or do you like to eat carrots? Do you like to eat cucumbers? Is broccoli your thing? Do you like Brussels sprouts? Are beets your go-to veggie? Do you prefer melons or grapes or apples? Pick something that you enjoy eating and plant that, because it's going to give you the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Satisfaction from growing, because it's something that you enjoy eating in the first place. So I always recommend doing something that you enjoy eating. Yep, mine too. It just gets bigger every year. I plant more every year, and I'm constantly learning something new. So yeah, gardening is just, you're never really going to know it all. There's always something more to learn, a new style of gardening that comes out, or a new technique that you haven't known. So yeah, just keep learning. Don't give up if you have, a flop year. Take that experience and run with it. Carrots are hard. I've had a hard time with carrots myself. I think I had one successful year, and it was because I grew in sand. So I don't know if I need to set up another raised bed with just a mixture of topsoil and sand and see if that works. But yeah, carrots have been a difficult one for me as well. All right, I noticed a couple people kind of jump in and out. So if you guys are new here, please leave a comment in the chat section. I love to hear from you guys. If you have any questions about gardening, go ahead and leave those there as well. I'm monitoring the chat box so that I can get your questions answered. Also, make sure you hit that thumbs up. That helps my video get out there and people can see that I am live. So thank you guys so much for commenting and thumbs up. And if you're feeling really generous, go ahead and share that video on your social media pages as well. Thank you guys so much. Alrighty, so moving on a little bit, I want to talk about some common pests that I've personally dealt with in my garden. I tend to have like the same handful of pests every year, and depending on the year and the weather conditions that we're having will determine just how heavy those pests are. So some pests that I've had to deal with are aphids, squash beetles, vine borers, potato bugs. I had horrible potato bugs last year. Hey, Bill Thompson, welcome, welcome. Glad you're here. See, I've had Japanese beetles, cucumber bugs, and this year I actually had flea beetles. So that was something new that I learned about. That's actually a thing. So a lot of these bugs can be dealt with kind of the same way. I try to garden as organically as possible. I know in the world that we live in, everything's kind of contaminated to a certain degree, some places more than others. But there's really no way to get 100% organic. So I don't worry or stress about 100% organic gardening because I just know it's not going to happen. So I can get it as close as possible, but I'm not going to stress about, that small percentage that isn't going to be organic. But as far as pest removal goes, the best ways that I have found to deal with pests are physically removing them or diatomaceous earth. Those have been my two best friends in gardening. And I do use them interchangeably and sometimes together or just at different times of the year. So for this garden season, I had horrible aphids earlier this season. They were all over everything. And the ladybugs weren't here yet. and they were starting to kill off my elderberry bushes and tackling some of my other fruit trees with like their little baby leaves coming in. Um, and the first thing that I did was I tried neem oil, and that didn't work. I tried blasting them off with a hose, and that didn't work. Um, so I just went through and I physically removed them. I put some gloves on and I went through and I just squashed them all. Um, and that seemed to do the trick. So aphids, I just squish them and get rid of them because the other two options just didn't work for me. So that's what I did with the aphids. Squash beetles are also ones that I deal with on a regular basis, especially through the summer months. And the best way to get rid of those is just physical removal. I usually get a jar of soapy water and just knock them into the jar because they're kind of dumb. They just kind of walk into the jar all on their own most of the time. So they're really easy to get rid of. And I can honestly I can tell my kids to take the jar out and go collect all of the beetles for me as well. And then I just, pay them a quarter or something for going to get rid of the bugs for me. Let's see. I have trouble distinguishing good from bad bugs. I wish I had a resource for them all. I ended up looking every single one up. Yeah, sometimes new ones. So I had a new one this year. I had flea beetles and I had no idea what it was. They were these little tiny black little beetles, like the size of like the tip of a ballpoint pen. And they were annihilating my potato plants. They were eating little holes all through the leaves. And like I said, they're little black beetles and they jump like fleas. So me and my son ended up looking them up together, and sure enough, they're called flea beetles, and they usually affect potato plants. And I ended up just sprinkling some diatomaceous earth all over the place, and that seemed to do the trick. So any kind of bug that has an exoskeleton, diatomaceous earth is going to take care of because it's a mechanical killer, which I really like. It's not a chemical killer or toxic in any way. It's basically ground up fossils, and it gets under, the moving parts of their exoskeleton and cuts them up or dries them out. And I think it's a combination of those two. The only problem with diatomaceous earth is it's not going to just affect your beneficial bugs. It's going to affect your non-beneficial bugs. It's going to affect your beneficial bugs as well. So it's going to, bother your praying mantises, your ladybugs, your butterflies, spiders. Like, it's going to affect all of that. So there comes a point in my season where I stop using diatomaceous earth and focus solely on the physical removal of pests. And that's when I start getting flowers. So flowers are going to attract the pollinators and the beneficial bugs, the bugs that you want in your garden. And so that's when I stopped using the diatomaceous earth. So during the early spring months, when everything's kind of growing and getting established, everything gets dusted because it prevents the pests from annihilating my baby plants before they're strong enough to handle some amount of damage. And then after things start blooming and blossoming and all of that, that's when I focus on physical removal. Let's see. Packing tape works really well for squash beetle eggs. It does. I actually use a lint roller for removal of squash beetle nymphs and eggs, and even the semi-larger ones. I think the nymphs are in a couple different stages. The real like little itty bitty ones, and then they're like the brighter red. But I found that the lint roller works really well. It also works good for cucumber beetles. They're like the little yellow ones that have stripes down their back. Those ones affect your cucumbers and squash type plants as well. So yeah, those are the ways that I kind of deal with pests in my garden, is just physically removing them and diatomaceous earth. Because nothing else really seems to work as well. You do have to stay on top of it with the physical removal, because if you like skip a day, they kind of go crazy, which makes it a little bit more labor intensive. But when it works, it works. Hey Bill, my quail are doing really well. I actually have a batch behind me right now. They're like this big now. So I need to get them moved over to a slightly larger brooder, and I'm working on collecting another batch of eggs for incubation, to hopefully have another batch of chicks. I might be ordering some eggs as well. I'm not sure yet, but so far so good. They're all doing really well. I've had some really aggressive males this year. Um, so I've had to vet a lot of my quail because the males are like ripping the backs of the heads open and pulling feathers. And I actually have a male right now who's missing an eyeball. Poor guy, but he's all healed up and they're doing well. But I need to figure out which of the males in there are being the bullies and dispatch them because I'm tired of vetting animals that really shouldn't need vetted in the first place. So, but other than that, the quail are doing really well. Let's see. Do you guys have any questions as far as how to get started gardening, what to grow, or common pest issues? Are you guys having any pest issues that you're having a hard time dealing with? I know one that I've had a hard time with every year is vine borers. I haven't really found an effective way to get rid of those yet. I did watch a couple videos where it was physically removing the problem, where they kind of did surgery on the base of the plant and they cut the vine borer out of the plant, which allowed the plant to heal and kind of reestablished its health. But I just haven't had the chance to try that yet. So I just market my eggs on Facebook. I know Facebook's kind of sketchy about selling animals and animal byproducts, so you just got to get fancy with the words. The best place that I have found leads for selling things locally is find your local, like your community Facebook group or your county Facebook group and post in there if anybody's interested in purchasing your eggs. That's what I did for my quail eggs as well as rabbit meat. And I had a couple customers come from that. So that might help you sell some of those eggs, Bill. Yeah, the vine borers are awful. They like sneak up on you and then they like take out your plant before you know it. You've got this healthy plant one day and then the next day everything's wilted and turning yellow and you're like, oh man, how'd I miss that? So I need to pull out those plants that are kind of killed off and plant some new ones, hopefully for a fall garden this year. I'm hoping I'm not too late with starting a fall garden here. Let me turn a light on. We're getting dark in here. That's a little better. So I know another way to deal with the garden pests is to rotate your crops. So pests will overwinter in your soil, and especially if they know that that same plant is going to be there the next year. And then you'll just have that reoccurring problem. So if you rotate your crops, so say one year you have potatoes in, garden bed A, and you've got onions in garden bed B. The following year, swap them. So do your onions in your potato bed and your potatoes in your onion bed. And then something I really want to focus on maybe next year's garden season is companion planting, where I learn, what plants really do well together and have that beneficial, drawing in the pollinators and eliminating the pests or repelling the pests. And then I know there's also like sacrificial plants that you can plant. So some plants have something similar plants to, like, say your main crop, but they attract the same bugs. So you can plant that kind of bait plant to draw your pest bugs away from your main crop. And people have had success with that as well. So that might be something for me to look into next year. for next year's gardening season. Maggots eating your onion bulbs. Well, that's weird. Usually nothing messes with your onions. There's not a whole lot that wants your onions. Because they're actually a pest deterrent. So you want to plant onions like around everything so you don't have the pest problem. So I'm wondering if your onions are rotting prematurely, which is what's causing the maggot issue. So are you having trouble with like an overly moist bed? Yeah, nasturtium is a good one I've heard of as well. It's like a good bait crop or bait plant that you can plant like in pots, like on the outskirts of your garden, and it'll draw the pests to that instead of your main crop. So I might do that next year. But yeah, I haven't had any problems with like maggots in my vegetables. The biggest one that affects like my root vegetables is potato bugs or pill bugs, like the little roly-polies. They have so many names. But again, I just use the diatomaceous earth and kind of sprinkle it around the base of the root vegetable, and that helps a little bit. That's kind of hard to get down deep for like the really deep root vegetables like potatoes. But I found that it helped with the pill bugs were actually going after my green beans this year, and I sprinkled diatomaceous earth over the green beans, and that helped kind of deter them and allowed my green beans to sprout and grow a little bit before they really got damaged. But yeah, maggots don't usually go after anything unless it's already rotting. So that would be my guess, is that your onions are prematurely rotting for some reason. That might very well be the issue, is that your ground is just too wet. I know I've had a couple bulbs rot out before they got established, and they kind of just turn to mush, which would attract pests. Because the root vegetables don't like being wet, and I think I overwatered a good bit of my onions because I lost about 50% of my onions this year. But that would be my assumption, is that the ground is just too wet and it's attracting bugs that prefer the rotting vegetables. That would be my guess. Alrighty, so I kind of want to move on to weed control. This is kind of a big one that makes your life in the garden just a little bit easier. What's that saying? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, or something like that. So this year, what I did was, it was actually the end of last year, I believe, or maybe it was really early this year. The years kind of blend together. I wood chipped all of the pathways around my raised garden beds. And this got rid of the grass, the weeds, all of that in between my beds. So I didn't have to mow or weed whack or any of that this year. But what I didn't do this year that I probably should have was mulched the inside of my beds to prevent the weeds coming up. I think the years prior I did hay in my raised garden beds, and it ended up sprouting, and I had more weeds to deal with because all the hay sprouted. So I don't recommend hay unless it's seedless, which I'm not sure that that's even a thing. So for inside the garden beds, you could probably just do compost. Wood chips would probably work. I haven't done it inside my raised beds myself. I know a lot of people use like a weed barrier fabric and that would work really well. We've done that before. I'm just not a huge fan of it because it's hard to work with. I don't like having to make new holes and dig through fabric if I want to plant something different than what I had there previously. So I'm just not a huge fan of fabric to begin with. But there, you could also do like grass clippings. Cardboard is a really good one. I love using cardboard because it blocks out the sun, so you're not getting those weeds pushing through, and the cardboard is thicker, so you're not going to have something come through the cardboard, and it eventually breaks down into the soil and just kind of adds to the overall nutritional value of your soil. So cardboard is a really great one to use, and it's easy to work with. You can cut it down to the size that you need. You can rip it up and just, kind of shred it and use it as a shredded mulch. Newspaper is another great one that you can use, and it breaks down really quick. And then you can kind of just till it into your garden bed before you put the bed to sleep for the winter. So yeah, those would probably be my methods of choice for weed barriers actually in like with your plants, where you're growing your plants, would be cardboard and newspaper. But again, I use raised bed gardening, and I don't do things in the ground. So my weeds are already limited as to how much will grow because I'm growing in a more condensed area, and the plants that I'm growing is actually kind of smothering out the weeds to begin with. So I don't have a ton of weeds inside my raised beds. Whereas if you're growing in the ground or you're using a tilling method, you're going to have more weeds to deal with because you're tilling up and exposing seeds from past seasons, weeds, and all of that jazz. So if you're using in-ground gardening, you might have better success with the straw or the fabric. But like I said, I like cardboard. It's free. It works really well. It breaks down at over the winter. And so you don't have to really worry about that too much. And then newspaper is another really great one that I would prefer using. Yeah, I use a local tree service as well to get my wood chips for free. He's great. Anytime that he's in my area, he reaches out and lets me know if he has a load and if I want it. And I've been able to get, I don't know, maybe 10 loads off of him this year to wood chip everything around here. The whole garden and orchard is wood chipped. Around my rabbitry is wood chipped. The cut flowers are wood chipped. And the chicken run is also wood chipped, which helps a lot with like the smell and the breakdown of their feces and all of that. So yeah, I highly recommend wood chips like everywhere. They're fantastic. But like I said, I haven't physically or personally used them myself in the raised beds. And I'm not sure how I would feel about having to move wood chips every time that I wanted to top off my beds, or I don't know, I just haven't done it yet. So I don't really have any experience with that one. So let's see here. So that's what I would do as far as weed control goes, which kind of leads me into my composting topic. Let's see here. What we got going on? All right, I've noticed a couple more of you guys jumping in. Welcome to today's live Q&A. We're talking all about gardening. If you are new and just stopping in, go ahead and leave a hi or a thumbs up in the chat. The thumbs up helps my video get out there and lets other people see that I am live. I'm here to answer your gardening questions. So thank you guys for jumping on. Thank you for joining me. We are moving on to the topic of composting and how we go about doing that in the garden. So composting, I am very lazy with my composting. I don't really have a rhyme or a reason to my methods. I just kind of throw everything in a pile, turn it once or twice a year, and call it a day. I don't have like a fancy 3-bin system, although I would love that because it's easier to turn and manage. But yeah, I just have a massive pile in my backyard and I dump everything in there. Bedding, hay, rabbit manure goes back there, chicken manure, garden weeds, scraps from the kitchen, like all of it goes to the compost. So I guess my method would be cold composting because I'm not getting it up to a temperature to break things down quickly. I'm just letting nature kind of take its course. With the smaller composting bins where you have like 2 or 3 different bins where you can separate things out, you would be constantly, wetting it with a hose and turning it, and this would create heat because you're mixing that moisture with oxygen and just the decomposition of the materials in your compost is going to create heat. And when you're doing that on a constant basis, adding that water, adding more materials, turning it, getting all of that in there, you're going to break down those materials a lot faster than if you just let them sit. Which is great if you need compost right away. I don't typically need compost right away. I usually wait a year or two and then I top off my beds. This year, I actually used all of my compost, so I don't have any at the moment. I'm kind of rebuilding my supply by adding in bedding and different manures and garden scraps and weeds and kitchen things and all of that. So maybe next year or the year after that, I'll have a compost pile that I can use again. So this year I'm actually going to get hopefully a load of horse manure that has been well aged to top off my garden bed. So my gardens will love that. But yeah, so composting, there's really only like 2 things you need to know to make compost. And that would be you need brown matter and green matter. So you need your dead stuff. So you need your leaves that have fallen off the trees. You need cardboard, paper items, sticks and twigs, leftover mulch, things like that. And then you need your green stuff. So you need your grass clippings, the weeds that you pulled out of the garden, plants that are no longer viable that you just need ripped out and you need that space. Pruning. So when you go through and prune your vegetables and your vines and things like that, that can all go in there. That's your green matter. As well as like your kitchen scraps. So say you made a salad and you had some cutoffs of lettuce or tomato or stuff like that. That can all go in there as your green matter. And then, you just kind of like lasagna layer it on top of each other. Although in my method, I just dump everything in the pile and let nature do its thing. So there's really no rhyme or reason to composting unless you really want to get into the nitty-gritty science details of composting, which I just don't do. And I haven't had a problem with my garden yet. Don't quote me on that. I haven't done any soil testing, which I might do next year as well, just to see where the health of my soil is, because you can't have a healthy garden without healthy soil. So that is something that I might do next year. But so far, this method has worked really well for me. I do try to make sure that I'm not getting pesticides or herbicides in my compost. So I watch closely if store-bought plants are going in there. So like potted plants that you can buy from a nursery. I try not to put those in there. If they die and dry out, I tend to just throw them in the burn pile instead. Because I don't want to get pesticides or herbicides in my compost, because that could be potentially devastating to your garden. So that's something to be mindful of when you're composting. But most of what's going in there for me is bedding, rabbit manure, chicken and bird manure, various types, my quail manure, and stuff that's actually growing in my garden is just going back into the garden. So pine, pellets in the field, wondering what to do with. I don't know about pine. I mean, that I doubt if they're already pellets how acidic they would be. I try not to do any acidic things in my compost, although once it's away from the source of acidity, so like pine needles, pine bark, stuff like that, once it's off of the tree, it starts losing its acidity. So mixing that into your compost in small amounts probably wouldn't cause any damage. I do just avoid it to be on the safe side, but honestly, I would just compost it. Start adding some green material to it, your grass clippings, weeds, prunings, vegetable scraps, all of that. Just start adding some green material to it, Bill, and mix it. And then you should have some really nice compost for your garden next year. Or you could just, if you don't have a garden, you could sell it as compost. That's what I want to do with my rabbit manure. I've been trying to dry it out and hopefully market it, but that's a lot more work than just cleaning out the rabbitry and throwing it in the compost. So it's something that hasn't gotten a ton of my attention as of late, but so yeah, that would be my recommendation. Okay, I didn't even think to use like pellets in the trays. I just leave the trays empty and rinse them out whenever I fill waterers up. But yeah, I would just compost them, just add your green material back into it and it'll start breaking down really nice. My pile is just exposed to the earth, so it's full of worms and bugs and all kinds of good things that are in there, churning things up and breaking things down. And usually once or twice a year, we borrow my in-laws' tractor and we turn it and just kind of let it sit over winter. And come the next season, everything is usually broken down pretty well. So let's see. Moving on to, do you guys have any questions so far about weed control or composting? Before we move on to pruning and trellising? All right. If not, just go ahead and leave them in the chat. I am watching, so any questions can go right in there. Pruning, I have found, is 100% necessary in the garden, especially if you're doing a raised garden bed or anything remotely close to square foot gardening where you're squeezing more plants in than the recommended amount on the back of your seed packet. I squeeze as much as I physically can into each garden bed, and that way I get the most harvest from my small space. And so pruning has really helped my plants stay healthy and strong and disease-free because of pruning. So there's a couple things that I prune pretty heavily in my garden, and that is tomatoes, any kind of squash or vining plant, and yeah, that's about it. So tomatoes and like the entire family of squashes. Okay, so that's zucchini, any kind of summer squash, your melons, your cucumbers, your spaghetti squash, like all of that gets heavily pruned because I have found that the more offshoots that your vine gives, so say you have like your main leader, and then you have, another one that's shooting off here and another one over there and another one over there, the plant is losing a lot of its energy and nutrients to those offshoots, right? So when we prune those smaller offshoots and we keep that main leader, that plant is going to focus on that main leader and its growth. So the main leader is going to become thicker, stronger, longer, and produce more flowers and more fruit versus it focusing on starting to grow out those runners, so to speak. So anything that vines, I make a point to get rid of those offshoots. And that way my main vine, my main leader is the strongest it can be, which will in turn lead to a better harvest and healthier plants. So when your plant isn't drowned out by all of the mass of it, more sunlight is allowed to get through, more airflow is allowed to get through. So you're not getting mildew, you're not getting heavy pest loads because there's not a lot of space for them to hide. And then you can just easily find them. So pruning is 100% necessary in my opinion, and I've had great success with it in the past and current seasons. My tomatoes, the tomatoes will go absolutely insane. So you've got your main leader, and then every leaf branch, you'll get a sucker. And so if you've got, 6 leaders, each with a sucker that's trying to grow another leader, your plant is going to get huge and fast, and you're not going to get as big of a harvest. You would think more leaders, more harvest, right? But that's just not the case. You end up with, sick plants that have disease because there's no airflow, there's less sunlight getting through, there's heavier pest loads because they can hide in the foliage. So when it comes to, those various things, make sure to prune and prune heavily, at least for the first couple weeks of growth. And maybe even like the first month and a half of growth. I'm still out there pruning things because, I want the strongest, healthiest plants that I can get. So for the tomatoes, I make sure that the suckers always get plucked off until maybe like the last few weeks of the growing season. I might let them grow. But I'm always making sure that I have like that one main strong leader on all of the plants, and pruning off those offshoots because they just take so much energy away from the plant and fruit production. Trellising kind of goes hand in hand with pruning. There's a lot of different ways that you can trellis. I personally use cattle panels because that's how I set up my garden. I also use T-posts and just some wire that I've strung across. I've seen people use netting, down lines from so you have like an A-frame with like a bar or a stick across the top with a string down it. You grow your plant up the string. I've seen that. There's so many different ways to trellis your plants, and it really just depends on your personal preference, what you have on hand, and what you're just comfortable using. So like I said, I personally use what I have in my garden is cattle panels and T-posts with some fence wire, and that seems to be working really well for me. And as I prune, I just make sure that things are either getting tied up on the trellis or weaved through the cattle panel, and that just provides support for the plant. So you're not going to end up with broken limbs or vines because there's too much weight on one point in the plant. And it just has more support, so it's going to take less energy for the plant to try to stay upright if it has something to lean against or be tied up against. So trellising is really important for all of those things that vine. I really want to try growing like zucchini and summer squash vertically. And I'm not 100% sure how I want to go about doing that. I've seen people do it with tomato cages, T-posts, but you basically just keep pruning it up the stem of the plant, and you just keep tying it off. But I've heard that helps with the vine borers as well. So maybe that'll be something that I really look into next year, is vertically growing like a bushier plant versus a vining plant. Do you guys have any preferred ways of trellising your garden plants? Oh, that's a good idea. I didn't think to use rebar. That would be super sturdy. I didn't see your comment before. Yeah, I tend to say that I'm going to prune things and then things get slacked on and forgotten, or it just grew too gosh darn fast for me to get to it. And then I end up with like a wagon full of prunings and clippings and whatnot because I had to go and like massacre my plant. But it happens. Sometimes the garden gets away from us. It's all good. It's just part of the learning process and the fun of having a garden. Are you liking the cattle panel trellises? I love them. I think they're fantastic. I actually want to try them in a couple different ways, but I don't have the space to put any more real garden space in, so I'll have to deal with what I got. But I actually have my raspberries this year. Actually, they like blew up in the last like week or two, and they're taking over my garden. So I need to figure out how to trellis or tie up or contain raspberry canes. I thought I dug them all up and moved them so that I could do that easier, but apparently that was not the case, and they all came back wherever the heck they wanted to. So they're all over the place out there, just kind of taking over the garden space. I get that one, Bill. Yeah, the animals take up a ton of time, so sometimes you got to pick one or the other. The quail have kind of kicked my butt this year. I love them. I absolutely love them, but I did not plan out their hutch situation the best. The hutch that I bought from Dale's Quails is absolutely wonderful. I love it. And it works brilliantly, but it's designed for inside a building. So it needs to be in a shed or a barn or a garage or something, because it was just the way it's designed. It's meant to be an inside hutch of some sort. And I have mine outside. So I'm having a problem with really wet trays and the feeders getting wet and moldy and the roof blowing off. And I actually had the entire hutch blow over the one day. We had a big storm roll through and the whole thing just over it went. So now I have it zip tied to the fence. And it's been interesting, to say the least. But I'm considering putting a extension on my chicken coop for the quail so I can get them inside of a building, and maybe that'll make my experience a little bit more pleasant with the birds. I love growing melons on cattle panels. Especially like, I don't know if a pumpkin is really considered a melon, but I love growing pumpkins on trellises specifically. They do so well on a trellis, especially the smaller ones. So like the little pie pumpkins, or little like the baby boo. I grew white baby boo pumpkins last year, and I will forever grow baby boo pumpkins because they're adorable. They're like this big and white and just the cutest darn thing. So I will grow those this year. I'm excited to get some planted actually for my fall garden. And cucumbers do really well on trellises as well. I need to get some more of those planted for fall also. From chickens pooping. That's fantastic. Mine actually haven't produced fruit. This is the first year that they're producing fruit, and I think my kids have eaten them all. So I don't think I'll have a problem with random raspberries everywhere. I did do a video of putting that hutch together. It went together beautifully. I love the design of it, but it's just an inside hutch, so I'm having some issues with it being outside. And the smell, yeah, the smell is awful. They poop a lot for little birds. I was surprised by just how much they can accumulate in a very short period of time, and it reeks. It's terrible. So I haven't found a super great way to deal with that either. Again, I'm kind of battling the elements with this hutch. As soon as it gets wet, oh, it's terrible. Absolutely terrible. So um I'm wondering if putting them in the garage with like the pine pellets like you're using, or even just pine chips would help with that, because it helps with the chicken coop and the chicken run a ton, having it wood chipped. So I'm wondering if, just getting them inside and have something to like catch or mitigate, the poop just sitting there in the tray by itself would help. But it's kind of hard to do that when it's outside and everything just gets wet. Pine pellets. I've used pine pellets for my cat's litter box before, and it works beautifully. I don't know why I didn't think about it for the quail, probably because I'm just having issues with everything being wet. So the pine pellets might not work until I get them under cover with something. Um, but I will definitely keep that in mind when I get them under cover and they're not just exposed to the elements. I also want to get them a better watering system. I just have like little chick waterers, and they're little gravity ones with like the dish. Um, and those are horrible, horrible for the quail. You would think quail are ducks with as much as they want to stand and poop in their water. It's disgusting. Um, so I need to get that situation squared away, and maybe I'll have just a little bit better of an experience with actually keeping the quail. I love raising them. I love hatching them. Um, they're adorable. But so far, the whole hutch situation I have not been thrilled with. Um, just because I just didn't do enough research on my part and picked something that wasn't what my needs were. So that was my fault. Nothing against Dale's quails. His cage is beautiful and very well thought out. It's just not meant for outside. That's all. Alrighty, guys. So probably going to wrap it up in about 10 minutes here. So if you guys have any other questions for me regarding the garden, we talked about, just to recap, we talked about how to get started, kind of what to grow, common pest issues and how to deal with them. We also talked about weed control, composting, pruning, and trellising. The only thing I really didn't touch base on was the fall garden. It is not too late to start a garden if you're new to gardening. There is a fall garden season where you can grow a lot of your cold hardier plants like sugar snap peas. Your pumpkins and gourds are really great if you start them now. That's the biggest thing. Depending on your grow zone, my last frost date this year is October 17th. So I have about 2 months left of a grow season. So I need to get my fall garden in like last week. I'm not too late yet, but so I just need to get on the ball with that. But so sugar snap peas, pumpkins, gourds, your squashes are great. Your other cold hardy stuff is like cauliflower, broccoli, your cabbages, kale. I believe Swiss chard does really good in the cooler months as well. So it is not too late to start a garden. Figure out, a space, and just go for it. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help with anything that is garden related. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to encourage you guys, answer your questions, or at least point you in the right direction. So, alrighty. Well, if nobody has any other questions, let's see. Maybe I can do raised gardens. Spring. Oh, container gardening would be a really great option for you, Bill. I have really been wanting to look into, what are they called? They're like vertical gardens where like they like stack on top of each other. Those would be a really great option for you because then you can take them with you if you move, and you still have the option of growing a lot of really great produce in those stacked like garden tiers. I forget what brand they are. But vertical gardening or container gardening would be a really great option for you being a renter. Alrighty, guys. Well, it has been an awesome hour with you guys talking about gardening. Thank you for joining us, Bill. Glad to have you here. Enjoy your evening. Thank you, everyone, for joining me tonight. I love talking with you guys about all of this homesteading stuff. So if you have any ideas or preferred conversations that you would like to have with me for the next video, go ahead and leave them in the comments for me or send me a message, because I like kind of catering these things to you guys as well. So I'm probably going to talk about maybe harvesting at the end of this month. So the next video, the next live video will be, let me check my planner here, will be the end of August. So I've been trying to do the last Friday of every month. This one got bumped because life happened and I couldn't get the last Friday in July. So the next live Q&A will be August 25th. And we'll probably talk about, like I said, harvesting and preserving your garden. So we might touch base a little bit on canning, dehydrating, freezing, that kind of thing. So if that's something that you're interested in, I hope to see you guys there. Alrighty, guys. So that wraps up this live Q&A. Thank you all so much for joining me and making this a really great conversation. I hope to see you guys on the next one. And I've got a lot of great videos coming up on the channel as well, so be sure to check those out. Alrighty, guys. Thank you so much. And remember to grow where you're planted.